Hello viewers and welcome to our report for round 2 of the Formula 1 2017 World Championship. It's the Chinese Grand Prix which has taken place this weekend, and joining me again is Tim Goodchild.
Ni hao, Alan.
And of course we'll be discussing everything that took place in the Formula 1 weekend leading up to the Grand Prix, an analysis of the Grand Prix, and looking ahead to Bahrain next weekend as well. So Tim, thanks for joining me, and of course kicking off then with the practice sessions and of course a bit of feedback following Australia last week. How have you seen F1 evolving?
So in Australia, Ferrari left on a high, returning to winning ways with Vettel on top stop at the podium. Mercedes, in contrast, left quite unhappy, whilst Lewis Hamilton did look happy on the podium, happy that he's got a car that he can compete with this year. He knew, as did the team, that they've got some work to find.
Certainly. I mean, the only person who looked unhappy was Valtteri Bottas at the time. Whether he felt that the team slowed him down, he wanted to have a go, at least a pop at trying to overtake Lewis. I think the team played it safe. Let's get some points on the board. And we're not going to say who's the number one driver, but we don't want anyone messing it up either way. So it was a decent first race of the season. I think by Melbourne standards, it wasn't bad. I've seen some Melbourne races where there's been very little overtaking. It's a funny circuit, really, and we don't get to see the full performance of the cars because quite often a lot of the teams turn up with them sort of half finished in a way. So moving on to China this weekend, we had a bit of news to kick off. Of course, Pascal Wehrlein not in Sauber. Giovinazzi taking his place, our hero from the last race. We'll come back to that in a moment. But moving to China, there was still a sort of a complete unknown in terms of the performance of the various cars, the various teams running on a completely different circuit, and also with bad weather conditions as well. I mean, we're looking at rain on the Friday. Tim, take us through some of the practice there.
Well, I think what's important to note, first of all, is that it wasn't really raining that much at the circuit. The problem seemed to be down in downtown Shanghai. The helicopter, the medical helicopter, we were told, was unable to land. So they could take up, and you had the television cameras and all the crews up in the helicopters hovering above the circuit. But as we found out in FP1, with 2 very lengthy red flag periods, there was very limited running that took place in FP1. And as we found out, I remember waking up early on Friday morning and seeing Max Verstappen, Felipe Massa and Lance Stroll as the top 3, thinking, well, either they found some massive performance or there's been something not quite right in that session.
Absolutely. Lance Stroll, they're up in 3rd place. Probably the only time he'll finish the session in 3rd place this year. But either way, very limited running for all the teams. There wasn't really much to go on. And of course, again, similar to Australia a couple of weeks earlier, the teams don't want to wear their engines out. So they're just not using the first practice session. It's almost not worth having at the moment with the way the regs are. The teams are barely using it, and they're certainly not pushing. They're just using it for very basic testing. So we didn't see much there. Interestingly, was it the first practice, they had the Porsche Cup, something like that, and the cars did run. Martin Brundle made a tweet about that. And of course, there's different rules for the Porsche cars to the Formula 1 cars. I think a point of note is that more people have died in GT racing than in Formula 1 racing over the last few years. And in fact, it's just as dangerous, if not more dangerous. So it's strange that one set of guys can run and the other guys can't. It also seems a bit strange that there was there was only one hospital miles away, and they asked for a police escort, and it was refused in some way. They couldn't arrange a police escort. It's only when a police escort was agreed they could confirm the race could run. So that caused a whole bunch of hassle with first practice. And then, of course, first practice 2 was cancelled.
Yes.
And on to, first practice, free practice. And on to free practice 3. Take us through that, Tim.
So, Saturday morning, we found out that the Ferraris seemed to be having the initial pace with a 1-2 from Ferrari with a 1:33.3. But they're having to squeeze in their entire race programs into one session. It makes you wonder whether a Friday is actually needed at all if they can get on the pace this quickly in just a 1 hour session. But as we go through, the pecking order, Valtteri Bottas getting the edge on Hamilton in 3 and 4. Massa showing that he does seem to have a good pace in this car this year. Question marks still raised over whether the Williams can come good in the wet.
It's got a good one lap pace, I'm finding. Good qualifying, good one lap. But consistently, they seem to not work well over long runs. And one thing that should be pointed out with Lewis is he was on to set the fastest lap. When he was setting his fastest lap, he outbraked himself at the end of the long straight and lost about half a second. So he was always on the pace this weekend. And we knew rolling into qualifying that he already had probably the fastest lap in his pocket. But even in this session, Sebastian Vettel wasn't showing his full pace. And there was a few times when he was sort of lifting and not showing and stuff like that. So still a lot of fun and games.
But going into just ahead of qualifying, all the drivers looking quite as expected, but the ones that sort of stand out with Jolyon Palmer running well in 9th, down to certainly compared to his teammate running well, where people are still expecting Hulkenberg to drive all over Palmer through the year, but we'll see how that sort of plays out. But then we have to sort of mention the McLarens. Fernando Alonso finishing in 17th. We're kind of expecting them to have had a bad weekend this weekend, down on power in the Honda engine, and Stoffel Vandoorne, being 0.3 off in practice from Alonso. No one was really surprised at that point to sort of see that. And then backing up in last place and 20th place was Antonio Giovinazzi, obviously the hero in Australia. Him struggling absolutely
struggling for pace. The Saubers and the McLarens at the back. This was pretty much as expected at this stage. I think just looking there, Fernando Alonso is always far quicker than his teammate. And Red Bull struggling obviously on this particular circuit, but we were never expecting them to do that well. The Renault's a funny one. It sort of pops up and down in terms of its single lap pace, but certainly developments there. But in terms of the session, it was quite an intense free practice 3 session, and rolling into qualifying, obviously it was going to be much closer, drier weather, dry circuit to see the cars going much closer to flat out speed. So Tim, take us through a bit of qualifying.
So Quali 1, with all cars on track. No surprise, the leaders going straight to the top of the pecking order, mainly making just the one run. Lewis Hamilton going in with a 133.333, all the threes, which was always the OCD in me. It was always nice to see. But looking at the business end of the first session, it's all going well for Antonio Giovinazzi, but in the dying seconds of Quali 1, he binned it as he was coming around the last corner, and spewed debris across the track and basically ruined the qualifying session for those behind him. Stoffel Vandoorne and Jolyon Palmer was on a particularly hot lap. They were
Grosjean in particular actually really messed up Grosjean, who we'll come back to that. He's made a comment about that actually. Properly smashed up his car. In a way, actually Grosjean can't complain because he actually made a mistake on the same corner earlier. So it is a tricky corner. They can run off. There's a bit of AstroTurf there, and with the moisture in the air, of course, it was very easy to spin out. A rookie error,
yes,
has to be said.
Yes, but and then we've got Max Verstappen, very out of place, originally qualified in 19th place. Apparently he was running on 4 cylinders, so he was massively down on power. So there was no chance for him getting out of Quali 1 from that. As we did find out later in the day, Jolyon Palmer and I think it was Romain Grosjean as well, they failed to show that they'd slowed down through the yellow flag period when Giovinazzi had spun out, so they were demoted 5 places, or basically put to the end of the back of the grid.
Yeah, no, that was interesting. That first part of quali, it's pretty much who you expect, but the person who was always overperforming for the afternoon was Fernando Alonso.
Yep.
Outstanding speed he was finding in that McLaren. In the twisty bits, no one could beat him. He was absolutely flying. And of course, it's just down that long straight the McLaren just didn't really have the. I'd love to see what that car can do with a decent engine in there. I mean, it shows me the chassis is not bad.
Yeah.
If they had the same amount of grunt as everyone else, there's no reason that they won't be battling in the top 6.
I mean, that wasn't Alonso saying, I'm great in the corners, so let's bring on Monaco. You know, he's going to be great there, surely.
My favourite line was, I'm driving like an animal.
Yes.
I think I'm driving like all the animals, he said later. So,
but consistently quick, because, you know, the easiest benchmark is your teammate. And Stoffel Van Dorn, you know, he qualified 0.6 slower than Alonso. So, you know, if not more. So, you know, Fernando, it's great. It's great to see him hustling these cars and putting in the performance that's needed.
Absolutely. So Fernando making it through to Quali 2 there as well, with the Toro Rosso. And I think one of the Saubers, Marcus Ericsson, made it through as well. That was a good result for him as well to get to Quali 2. And then, of course, into Quali 3. Of course, then Lewis getting pole position with a fantastic lap from Vettel there. So close between those guys. Vettel just pipping Valtteri Bottas to second there by thousandths of a second. I mean, that is so close, really unbelievable.
I think it was Toto Wolff that after the qualifying session, he was interviewed by Sky Sports, and they asked him how much is that on the racetrack, and he said 5.6 centimeters. You know, so they'd already done the calculation because he knew that he was going to be asked that question.
Yeah, 5.6 centimeters, unbelievable. When you have different cars, different engines, completely different drivers, everything
And I think
is different.
I think it's also, I still find it amazing that, you know, we're not talking about the same team here. It's Ferrari and Mercedes. There's been a change in technical regulations and on all this stuff over the winter, and to come second race of the year and to find, you know, the gap just between Lewis and Sebastian, you know, was just over a tenth and a half or so. It's absolutely amazing that all the different bods at Ferrari down in Maranello and in
the factory
in England for Mercedes, that they can still make cars that are just.
Yeah, I mean, outstanding speed. But then you drop in almost a second when you go down to Daniel Ricciardo in 5th place. I mean, there is a big gap between the top 4 and everyone else at the moment. It's not close.
No.
So it really is a Ferrari versus Mercedes battle. And Red Bull just haven't shown up yet. I mean, in terms of qualifying, they have a lot to do. And it looked to me like it's partly the chassis. There's definitely improvements needed to the chassis. It's not as planted as previous Adrian Newey chassis are, you expect. But also engine performance, they were struggling. It doesn't seem like it's got the same performance as the other cars. So there's definitely work to do at Red Bull. I have no doubt that by the time they turn up in Europe, they'll have a vastly different Red Bull car. It will literally transform in the next few races. In fact, this car was very different from the one they had in Australia. So there is a lot to come there. But Tim, moving on to the race then, let's kick off. So, of course, we had the two guys demoted to the back of the grid there.
Yep.
That was the first sort of major bit of news in the morning. That moved Max up as well. He's no doubt pleased about that. We had the cars going on the sighting lap, and Jolyon Palmer opting to go straight into the pits to start from the pit lane on slick tyres, which was a brave move, a bit of a crazy move if you ask me, but you have nothing to lose.
But then you had Carlos Sainz starting, was it on slicks, and he was in 11th place on the grid. So they were, I mean, you know, I suppose you got to argue what have they got to lose. Even Carlos Sainz, what has he got to lose? You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you may as well go for it. You never know. I mean, the only thing is that when you're slightly inexperienced, you've got a new chassis. Sometimes it's good to play it safe with the leaders. The leaders are on the best possible strategy. And they're not going to muck around. They're going to have everyone else testing before they move over. And you might get slightly lucky, but in conditions like that, there is always a chance of a safety car.
Yep.
So is it worth the risk? So just before the race, one thing that's interesting that's going to cause some controversy, and some of you will no doubt disagree, but Sebastian Vettel lining up on the grid to the left of his grid slot.
He wasn't in the box, was
He wasn't
he?
in the box. He wasn't in the lines. The painted lines are there for a reason. Whether there's an advantage or not is irrelevant. The fact is that he wasn't in his grid slot. And I don't think it was right that he got away without a penalty. I think they were thinking, oh, God, look, if Vettel gets a penalty, the race is as good as over. We can't have that happening. And they let him off.
Yep.
As far as I'm concerned, that was a slam dunk penalty. He wasn't in his correct grid
I'm
slot.
surprised there was not even like a reprimand or points on his license.
Yeah,
as,
I am surprised. There should have been something. I mean, I think it was actually Michael Schumacher was the first time I saw a car going into their grid slot at a wonky angle.
Yes,
right?
yeah.
And thinking, what? I've not seen that before. Michael Schumacher angles his car to cut off his rival, but Michael did things like that. And he was inside his box. No one could really say anything, slightly at an angle. But especially when he was on the dirty side of the grid, he would literally angle himself towards the clean side to get off the dirty side as quickly as possible. So I do think that was wrong in terms of...
And the fact that they've set a precedent, you know,
Yeah.
who's to say that Lewis could sort of go to some sort of track thinking, if say he's on the dirty side of the track and he knows that he can be a little bit closer to the clean side, he's going to do it, isn't he?
Absolutely. You know, so set a precedent. Now, I think that the FIA need to clear this up quite quickly.
Yeah.
I really do. And I believe Christian Horner has also asked for clarification on this issue, and I can see why. So on this particular issue, I think he got away with it on this occasion, but I don't want to see more of that in the future. You've got a grid box, you park in there, that's the end of it. And as I say, they let him off, but they really should be having words with the drivers about that. But anyway, race starts, they launch off.
And I have to say,
Yep.
just on the race start, I know for this year they've changed the sort of the clutch, so it's all purely down to the driver. There's part of me that almost thinks it's almost easier now for the driver because they're not reliant on a bit of technology within the car, and some cars were better than others anyway. It's like we always used to see the Ferraris seem to launch off. Don't get me wrong, I prefer it this way, that it's purely down to the driver, but I can't help but thinking that we've seen 2 races now and everyone's launched away from the grid pretty cleanly, you know.
Perfectly. I think this is what I find strange. When this Formula One used to have manual starts, there was always someone who struggled to get away. There was always someone who perhaps got it completely wrong.
Yeah.
No one's got it wrong. No one's made a single mistake. And it makes me wonder whether the manual starts are what they used to be, or if they're a little bit simpler. Maybe we'll see that as the season goes on. But so far, it just seemed like an automated start.
Particularly with the fact that the track was damp. You know, you'd expect there to be a little bit more wheel spinning from someone.
There's no wheel spinning at all. They all get away absolutely perfectly. So it does. Seem
Although,
strange.
just thinking that, there was a comment made at the weekend that because of these thicker tyres and they are more durable, that the odd bit of wheel spin is actually not affecting the getaway as much as when they had sort of skinnier wheels.
No, I don't think that, because when they were using slick tyres and manual starts years ago, it wasn't really. Yes, they got lots of wheel spin sometimes, or sometimes the car bogged down, or they didn't get it into gear right, or they failed to change into second gear quickly enough. I mean, admittedly, they have seamless gearboxes now, which are much more efficient, and also the rev range was quite difficult to find the biting point absolutely perfectly back then. I feel now they must have a slightly wider biting point in terms of an engine map just for the start. But either way, the drivers seem to be getting away in almost automated fashion. So onto the start, obviously Vettel goes away, he holds off Valtteri. It's quite aggressive between those two, actually. But just going through the lap, I mean, I just wanted to mention, obviously it's got to be mentioned, is the incredible start from Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
I mean, first lap of the year, basically. It was like he was playing the video game.
It was F1 97, wasn't it?
It was. Well, you accelerate. When you play the game, you accelerate into the first corner and you just try to overtake as many people as you can. You know, they always brake a bit earlier than you, or you brake a bit too late. And the way he found the grip around the outside was exceptional driving from him on those first few corners. And we'll come back to that later. Incredible the amount of overtakes from him. Of course, on the first lap as well, we see Lance Stroll off the circuit. a bit of disaster for him, really, because he needed a better race this time. No fault. Well, I say no fault of his own. They didn't put a penalty against him. And again, this is a controversial, probably statement from me, but he obviously didn't know that Perez was there. He wouldn't have just driven into him.
No.
He just didn't know he was there. Perez would have known he didn't know he was there. And the other thing to remember is that that isn't a standard overtaking spot. Now, what I sometimes find is when you have rookies that come into Formula One, the drivers who've been in it longer tend to bully them a bit.
Yeah.
Right now, so Perez is going to say, Lance Stroll isn't going to want to crash at all. He's not going to want to crash. So if you throw one up the inside, he'll just jump out your way. That's what he'll have been told by the team. That's what they'll have worked on. So on this occasion, that didn't go as planned. But I couldn't help but feel that Lance Stroll's race was ended by an overly ambitious move from Perez. When you look at all the other overtakes in the day, they were much more carefully thought out at turn 6, or at the end of the back straight. They weren't just overtaking on all random parts of the circuit. So unlucky Lance Stroll, but better.
We'll let him
weekend
off for
point.
this one.
We will. But a better weekend for him for that point. But still, I've not seen anything spectacular from him yet. He really hasn't. He still looks like he's not quite ready for it.
Not what you'd expect for a Williams driver, put it that way.
No. So that was it was a pretty epic first couple of laps. Then we had I saw Jolyon Palmer spinning out on his new tyres, and he was like, oh dear.
Well, he was trying to go for the he went into the pits on slick tyres and wanted to try to capitalise on the change in the weather conditions as we knew they were going to come. But
well, then lots of cars piling into the pits, weren't there? I mean, we had a whole gaggle of cars piling into pits and complaining there was no grip. Yes,
but that was triggered, of course, by the virtual safety car, caused by our hero from last race, Giovinazzi, who basically made a replica of his qualifying crash. But did a better job of it, really, by ripping off the front corner.
Yeah, it was a real mess of the car, wasn't it? I mean, wow, such a mess. A shame for him, just pushing a bit harder. They showed basically there was a little bit of water on the circuit there. Yeah. He hit that and aquaplaned basically a little bit went on the power. And again, that was kind of a beginner error, really. It's the sort of stuff that you'd expect an experienced driver who's been driving for however many years, 15, 20 years, to actually, well, I don't know how old he is actually, he's probably 15 years, and you'd expect him to know that, having driven in various different conditions and having known that water runs along that part of the circuit or can settle there. The grid was the wettest part of the racetrack.
Yes.
So no, a poor result from him this weekend. Two major rookie errors, and Sauber, wow, did their mechanics have a lot of work to do from both those instances. But yes, the safety car taking the cars through the pit lane.
Yeah.
Massive clean-up of the circuit there, and everyone's struggling on these slick tyres.
Absolutely, but the way, because we had the virtual safety car to begin with, and then it went into a full-blown safety car, and you had Vettel, who decided to pit under the virtual safety car. Then when the actual safety car came out, that's when the likes of Hamilton pitted, and it kind of undone sort of the strategy that Ferrari were going for, because when the safety car came out and the McLarens pitted and they all did their stops, you then found that Vettel was down in 5th place behind his teammate Raikkonen. Then you had Bottas, well,
spinning out.
Bottas at one point,
yeah.
and then he made his amateur spin, as he put it.
I can imagine his physical pain when he made that error. I mean, I can imagine him. You can clearly see he loses control. He tries to rescue it, and it makes it even worse. And then he's got to wait for the field to pass by until he can turn in. What a terrible time for Valtteri. And he had good speed in the car, really good speed. I mean, he set a lot of fastest laps in that race, and there's no doubt in my mind he'd have been second place, but unfortunately stuck then. So we're restarting, and Hamilton followed by Ricciardo, Verstappen, Raikkonen, Vettel, and they were sticking together like glue.
Yeah. It was a wonderful shot done on the back straight. You had all 5 of them, all coming down the straight. It was just a wonderful sight to see, and that continued for quite a period of time as well.
Yeah, I mean, Hamilton took some time to try finding heat get heat back into those tyres. He was really struggling there. But luckily for him, I think if he had the Red Bulls behind him that didn't have the power to overtake.
And they weren't super softs, weren't they, as well?
Yeah, so he knew they were going to pit. They didn't have the power to overtake, even if they did have more grip and performance at that time. He was holding the two Ferraris back, who, again, they'll have had cold tyres as well and wouldn't, took a time to get past. And in a way, this was kind of a key part of the race because Sebastian was blocked. He couldn't get past. He was clearly quicker. But this is motor racing. I've seen people complaining about Kimi holding Vettel up. Listen, Vettel's in a motor race. If he's better than Kimi, he should overtake him.
Absolutely.
If he's better than someone, overtake them. You're going to have good races and bad races. Lewis was in the lead. That's great when you're in the lead. I mean, Sebastian Vettel was always a bit of a pain when he was in the lead.
Absolutely.
I remember a few years ago because he would just sail off in the distance and you'd go, oh, well, another win to Vettel on lap 5. And we'd never see him again for the rest of the afternoon.
Yeah.
So, let's talk a bit about that. We had Max Verstappen overtaking his teammate Daniel. That was a nice little overtake there. He wasn't expecting that. It's quite deep on the brakes and got it just right. But then, obviously, Sebastian Vettel having to get past Kimi. And then, wow, what an overtake past Daniel Ricciardo, setting it up corner after corner. And then finally into that turn 6, he goes round the outside. I just thought, wow, what a move. And he really relied on the mechanical grip of those tyres. The mechanical grip that they haven't had these last few years to do something like that at slow speeds, plus a touch of wheels as well. Love a bit of that. Bit of smoke.
I loved how it rubbed the paints off the markings on the Pirelli tyres on each other's car. So on some shots you're like, hey, what tyres have they got on? You don't know because they've rubbed each other's paints off. That's great.
Immediately gone. I love that. Love that. It was a bit of classic wheel-to-wheel action. And I'm glad the tyre was actually durable enough to actually take that as well, which was nice to see. So that, we were talking a bit earlier about it, but organic overtaking, that's what this season has shown us. I mean, that wasn't DRS assisted. It was mechanical grip assisted, balls to the wall overtaking. And it was Sebastian Vettel looking so good in that car. You could tell how confident he was. He was the man, as far as he's concerned, he was the best driver there, and he was going to win this race. And he went round, and that was a fantastic result for him. And then, of course, so we hadn't mentioned, but Max had shot off in second place at this stage. He was catching up with Lewis for a while, but then falling back as his tyres were falling off. Couldn't really do much. Vettel closing up, of course, and then Max struggling, outbraking himself down the end of the back straight. Obviously, his tyres were completely worn back then. I think that's one thing to remember, that those guys were hanging in there, those Red Bulls at that point. But that was it for Vettel, of course, second place then, hunting down Lewis.
So I just want to mention, just to go back to refer to organic overtaking, which is a phrase that seems to have come out this weekend from nowhere. It was as mentioned by Martin Brundle. And I've seen some reports since, people sort of saying that there wasn't enough overtaking this weekend, and I completely disagree. I think that was a great balance of overtaking this weekend, and we had a wonderful insight to what I think the original plan for DRS was, which was to enable people to run close together, but to give them an opportunity where they can overtake in a more sort of organic way, and that sort of thing which I'd hope that we get to see more. DRS should never have been effectively like an overtaking mode, because it doesn't do anyone any favours, does it?
I mean, I remember Mark Webber complaining about it years ago. He said, nothing you can do. They drive up behind you, they drive round you. You can block them and they just drive along the racing line. There's nothing you can do. And so that was a false overtake. It wasn't earned in any way. There's just nothing a driver could do to defend himself. Now, at least, yes, it closes them up, but the driver now needs to get the slipstream of the car in front and make a decision of which side they're going to brake on, and that's why you're seeing these cars switching around more. And
that was echoed as well from Fernando Alonso, who had an absolutely amazing Grand Prix. Yes, he ended up in retirement due to suspension failure, but up to that point, he was fighting in the midfield again, running in 7th for the majority of the race, and again able to defend his position through down on that back straight. You know, that Honda engine that is apparently down on power, but through the aerodynamics or what have you, the DRS was not allowing people to zoom past that much. I mean, I do know there was one shot of Bottas absolutely flying past Fernando at one point, which perhaps didn't do his race much justice. But
no, I think that was later in the race.
Yeah.
I think the engine was sort of wearing out as time was going on. I think what I'm surprised of with McLaren is, one, Fernando driving the wheels off that car. Wow, his driving just continues to impress me all the time. But another thing is that the Honda is supposed to be well down on power, and yet somehow he's keeping it. It was doing a decent job down the straight. It was doing a better job than I was expecting it to do. I was expecting everybody to go past Fernando like Bottas did without DRS, let alone with DRS. And it wasn't too bad. So, I mean, it shows if Honda can just bring it together.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been a lot of nonsense coming out from Honda recently that they thought it was going to be too easy to develop this year, and
the arrogance.
The next engine will be the one. The next engine, they said the Australia engine was meant to be the one, but they are a bit of a laughing stock in the sport now. There's been some jokes recently. Dr. Helmut Marko was saying thanks to Ron Dennis a few days ago. Thank you, Ron, because you helped us because we were going to go for a Honda engine, and you stopped us from having a Honda engine. Big thank you. So
ouch.
Ouch. Yeah. So there is stuff like that going on, and I both cars broke down for McLaren.
Yeah.
Full house in terms of cars breaking down again. Such a shame. I mean, every time Fernando's on for points again, physically painful to see him. Just have to pull off, but he's taking it very well. He's enjoying. I think he's actually enjoying these cars. He's just enjoying going out there. He's enjoying his racing, and let's hope that the next version of the Honda engine can at least put him in. One, can finish a race, and two, can comfortably put him into those top 10 positions where he belongs. But we all want him winning. And we'll probably say this through every race. I mean, we've got another painful Bahrain Grand Prix, and I think that's going to be painful for McLaren as well coming up.
Yeah. But if the car lasts, he will score points. As simple as that. But yeah, anyway, so we're going into the final stages of the race with Vettel. He was about sort of 6 seconds behind, between 6 and 10 seconds behind Lewis, sort of trying to close down. There was a bit of a spurt, but every single time Vettel put in a killer lap, Lewis seemed to be able to go that little bit quicker. So he was managing the gap. Although I did read following the race that Lewis felt he was chilled racing up front until Vettel appeared up in second place, where he thought, I need to pay attention now.
Control. He had a reasonably big gap of around 12 seconds to Vettel. He had his pit stop and he came out, and it was between 7 and 8 seconds. And Lewis said on his radio, how did he close up so much on me? And they said, Lewis, we kept you out there so we knew you had clear space after the pit stop. So they held him out there while Vettel was getting closer. But that's what they should have done at Australia 2 weeks earlier. And they made up for their mistake. So great strategy from the team in terms of common sense.
Absolutely.
And bringing him out at a clear time. After that, Vettel was quicker, but the gap was just too much with 15 laps to go. But elsewhere, I would like to also note that Hülkenberg actually stacked up the penalties. 5-second penalty for overtaking under the virtual safety car, followed by a 10-second penalty for overtaking under the safety car.
That must be a record in its own, surely.
What was he doing? I mean, goodness me. Well, Hülkenberg was just on it. He just saw a car wanting to pass it. That was quite interesting. I'd love to have seen the instances of how those mistakes happen.
Perhaps he thought he was also playing a computer game, but he had the assists.
Maybe. Assists on. Very strange, isn't it? I mean, when you're going slowly, perhaps somebody went off, I was thinking, came back on, and he just went around him or something like that.
And I actually wondered whether, clearly this didn't happen, others would have found out by now, but I did think at the time whether, because they're all piling into the pits, was the computer system having a bit of a bad time trying to calculate where everybody was sort of, whether they were overtaking or not. But,
I
Clearly
mean,
didn't
I
happen,
know
so.
we haven't got to the end results yet, but I will say, bit of pain for Jolyon because despite 2 penalties, he still beat Jolyon. So it wasn't a good day for Jolyon, was it?
No, he needs a decent race in Bahrain, that's for sure.
Yeah, neither Renault making the points. So, yeah, continuing, obviously, Vettel, Toro Rosso of Daniel Kvyat pulled off. I didn't see what the technical problem looked like, some kind of engine.
You know, I didn't
issue
even
there.
twig that he was there for the whole weekend, quite frankly, if I'm honest with you.
No, I know, I tell you, Carlos, his teammate, we certainly know he's there. Wow. I mean, the guy's always racing really well. We keep saying it, but really, he deserves to be in a better team as well.
Yeah. Science for Williams next year.
Grosjean, possibly. Who knows? I mean, it all depends. I mean, there was talk of even Fernando going to Mercedes, but then that's been stopped now and saying that Lewis doesn't want him there. It's a shame.
Why would Lewis want him there? I mean...
Well, he wouldn't.
Exactly.
I mean, Lewis wouldn't want a double world champion to compete against. I mean, last time these two came head to head, it was very different.
Absolutely,
They're both much more mature than they were before. But when they're out on track, it gets serious, and anything's going to get competitive. Having said that, it would be quite tidy because Fernando could go to Mercedes, and then Bottas would go back to Williams. So that could still happen.
I think that the latest rumour I've heard, which I think could happen, would be a return for Fernando to go to Enstone and go to join Hulkenberg at Renault.
It could happen. It could, but then it's a frying pan to the fryer. I mean, when you're looking at the overall finishing positions at the moment, yes, Renault they've got the potential to get back there, but are they going to get back there in the next 2 or 3 years? I don't know. I mean, Renault are saying, they were saying a few months ago, they believe their engine will match Mercedes next year. They believe that their rate of improvement will mean, give or take, they'll be there, and that would make a big difference. But they need to develop a lot this year. Very difficult for Fernando. From Fernando's perspective, finish this season. Let's see where McLaren end up. Let's see where the Honda engine ends up. In a way, there's even talk. I mean, there could even be a space for him at Ferrari if they get rid of Kimi. There is a bit of rumbling with Kimi at Ferrari. Kimi was grumbling a lot on the radio about a lack of power. He doesn't feel that his car is delivering performance for him right now, and he was making that known on the radio. We get into conspiracy theories then, don't we? Do they have a favourite in Sebastian Vettel? And let's Ferrari has previous form where this is concerned. When Eddie Irvine was on course to win the Ferrari World Championship, Ferrari only had 3 wheels for him ready at the pit stop because they didn't want Eddie Irvine being a Ferrari Formula 1 World Champion.
Surely not.
Surely not. It must have been a mistake, and they forgot that you need 4 wheels on the car. Let's say Ferrari have got a little bit.
The fact that they showed more love for Mika Salo than Eddie Irvine shows everything.
They have form, don't they, in terms of choosing a favourite. So we can't forget that. But that'll be interesting next year to see where that goes.
But hey, look, let's wrap this up. Lewis, he managed the race perfectly. He achieved a 3rd Grand Slam, something which I didn't even know existed until at the weekend. So just for the record, that is pole, led every lap and won. So he achieved that. I think even he said in the press conference afterwards, Grand Slam sounds like tennis.
Yeah. It is tennis. It is tennis.
It doesn't really make sense.
Organic overtaking, Grand Slams, overtakes, undertakes, every kind of take. It's all happening in terms of new F1 language.
Absolutely, but 54th win, and let's also fact it was his 63rd pole as well this weekend. So certainly getting closer to the big scalps in terms of the record table for all-time drivers. But no, great performance by Lewis. He brings the championship title to even pegging. It's 43 points each between Vettel and Hamilton at the top of the table. Other key points from the race, though, obviously Max did brilliantly to get him from 17th on the grid up to 3rd. Daniel Ricciardo, he must be thinking, what the hell happened. Bear in mind that he qualified a hell of a lot higher than Max, and I'm sure the inter-rivalry there and in Red Bull will be one to watch in Bahrain.
It will be. I mean, there was a great last few laps where Daniel was all over the back of Max, looking for an opportunity to pass. But as you always know, never take out your teammate.
No.
And if there wasn't a clear opportunity to pass someone else, he may have made a lunge. But with Max, I think he needs to be sensible. It's early in the season, and I think he was as shocked as anyone.
But then, just on that though, I was actually screaming at the TV saying, "Max, stop whining." At the blue car, the blue flag, the lack of the blue flag in front of him. It's like you weren't close enough to overtake him. Shut up.
I agree. I mean, he was going on about Grosjean. Oh, it's affected me, and he was anything. He's putting himself off more by his own panicking, frankly, about Grosjean. He wasn't anywhere near Grosjean. The other thing as well, they mentioned in the race actually that Grosjean was about to overtake. He'd been lapped by Kimi, and he was going to overtake Kimi again at some stage, and then he'd get blue flags straight away. Again, that's another interesting rule that probably shouldn't happen, should it? Because if somebody overtakes you and then slows right down, and that kind of makes for a silly situation at times when you can overtake them because you're quicker, but then you've immediately got to slow down again if you can't immediately pull away from them. So, strange one we'll come back to, no doubt, in the future.
So it just leaves us to talk about the best performance of the weekend. It's quite a difficult one to judge this weekend, and I think we've certainly got a lot of honourable mentions. But for me, it's certainly Fernando Alonso is the best performance. I think again, sort of seeing him hustle that car to the inch of its worth was great to see, and I'm really excited about seeing what he can produce. I can't help but think it reminds me of Damon Hill in 1997 in an Arrows, where crappy car, but he was pushing in a champion's drive every race. When
the F1 2017 game comes out this year, the car to choose is going to be a McLaren.
Yes.
Right, it's going to be how high can you finish in your underpowered McLaren. Everyone would do it, because that's what we all did in F1 97. It was Damon Hill.
Yes.
You had the stiffest suspension, you could set it up, the lowest downforce you could manage, and then you'd just go out there. And it was so hard to drive, yet so thrilling when you finished in 9th place or something. Back then, of course, points were only 1st to 6th, so that's 6th point, 1 point for 6th place. My goodness, we earned that. A stunning performance from Fernando.
Yeah, but then honourable mentions: Carlos Sainz, a great performance again in the Toro Rosso. Let's not forget that he did start on the slicks, so great strategy there. Verstappen, you can't ignore the fact that he started 17th on the grid, finished 3rd,
16th in the end, yes.
16th on the grid, and finished 3rd.
Amazing.
And I think I also have to say, well done to Magnussen. He did a great drive, scored the first points for Haas by finishing in 8th.
Yeah, a great job for him. Toro Rosso, very, good performances. I mean, it's funny, but no one's mentioning Toro Rosso. They got nearly no TV coverage. They're hardly mentioned, and yet they're making it into top 10 shootouts, and you barely see them.
Yeah.
But they are both doing a solid job. But Carlos, wow, he's really showing, how good he is out there. And for whatever reason, he's been lucky from a technical perspective that his car survived the distance. But overall, Tim, I really enjoyed this race.
Before we wrap up that bit, though, we've got to talk about the worst driver or the worst performance of the weekend, and sadly, it's going to be the Sauber driver, Giovinazzi. He crashed in quali, crashed in the race at the same location. It is Wehrlein seats. Will we see him back in Bahrain?
I think you'll see Wehrlein in Bahrain. I think he's had 2 races. Who knows? I'd actually quite like to see him in one more race to see, because it's like best of 3 then, isn't it? He's done one really well. He's done one really badly. He'll have learned a lot from this weekend, but clearly, he needs more practice sessions. So it would be nice to see him in more free practice, getting some time. In terms of perhaps dry weather, I think if it was dry weather conditions, he perhaps wouldn't have had the same problems. But he clearly needs some experience in that area. But 0 to 0.
There we go. Good. So that wraps up China. Just a few tidbits of news that came out over the weekend, which are certainly worth mentioning. Sadly, the Malaysian Grand Prix will be our last visit there this year. Shame, I quite like that circuit. So it will be. They were sort of the first of the Herman Tilke designed circuits back in 1999. So we've been there, going there for nearly on 20 years, and
It's gone quick, hasn't it? I mean, that was the year '99. My goodness, that was when Schumacher had that crash at
Yes.
Silverstone and broke his legs. I was there at the time, and I remember watching. I was sitting there at the chicane just down there, and I saw it happen on my little pocket TV. So I knew he was going off, and I looked over, and then poof, a sort of puff of gravel come up when he crashed in the wall. And of course, then he was out all year. He came to Malaysia at the end of the season fresh, and it was much hotter at that time of year as well, ridiculously hot. And of course, was straight back on the pace. Incredible speed from him. But no, Malaysia's been an interesting Grand Prix. We've had one session with half points rained off for Jensen, light issues. We've had various different weathers that have really transformed the race over the years. On a personal front, I've never been as keen on the circuit because I always found it was too wide. And even Mark Webber said you could land a jumbo jet down it when he first raced on it. He thought it was way too wide. And there's a part of me that felt that it was too wide. It could have been a bit more narrow in terms of its design. But either way, I think it's had a good innings.
Yep.
I
think it's been a successful track in terms of, if you compare it to the other sort of flyaways that we've had in recent years, you know, the likes of Korea and India, which sort of lasted all about 3 or 4 races, if that.
Yes.
So, you know, I think it's served its purpose. But in return, though, so as a promise by Liberty Media, we're having a focus on the European audience. We're going to see the return of Germany, which is great, but I think particularly for me is the return of the French Grand Prix, which is going to be at Paul Ricard, not a circuit that's had known for Formula 1 racing. It's been a Formula 1 test track many times, but I think it's going to be great to see the French Grand Prix back on the calendar, bringing the total to 21 races for next year.
Yeah, interesting circuit to have it at as well. Not like you say, not traditionally associated with F1, but it would be nice to go somewhere new and a different circuit. I'm really keen to see. It looks like it's going to be quite a high-speed circuit once it's all put together. So yeah, very interesting to see it. Nice to have another European race as well.
And then there were some rumours that New York could be returning as early as next year. I think that's probably a little pie in the sky thinking there, but
it's ambitious, isn't it? It's ambitious. I would love to think that. I know a lot of plans are in place, but the circuit still isn't there yet. I believe it when the circuit is built and we see it, but we'd all love to see a race there. Yeah,
absolutely. I still think Liberty's aims are to get up to 25 races. I personally think that's probably going to be too many. I think the 2021 is a good number, and personally I don't want to devalue the value of the Formula 1 World Championship. I think you should have a more limited number of races than just one every other weekend.
Yeah, it needs to be a structure in terms of good locations, good races, and something special about it, you know, in terms of the layout.
And then there was a really interesting meeting that took place quite recently, but they're talking about the 2021 engine regs, and obviously we're all quite keen to move on from this hybrid era of rather quiet engines, certainly in comparison to the V8 and V10 era. But there was a meeting held with all the current engine manufacturers, but also attended by Stefano Domenicali, who also you remember as the Ferrari team manager from years gone by. But he was there representing the VW group, which, as you all know, is Porsche, Audi within that group as well, and also Alfa Romeo were there as well. Sergio Marchionne's aim is to get Alfa Romeo back into Formula 1 as well. Key outputs from that meeting: desire to maintain F1 as a pinnacle of motorsport technology, striving for future power units to be powerful while becoming simpler and less costly, improving the sound of the power units, and it always pains me when you sort of hear or you sort of read the words power units. It should be an engine. It's not a freaking power unit. But also a desire to allow drivers to drive harder at all times, and I think we're starting to see that this year. And obviously, I know we had safety car period at the weekend, but they were on the pace for the entirety of the Grand Prix.
I think we all want, I mean, like you say, more teams in F1. So they want that, more competitive teams in F1. No, we don't just want customer teams. We don't want, yes, it's nice to have a bigger grid. We want them competing to win the race, not just to come in 12th place. And if you're going to have more teams and you do just want teams coming in 12th, then ultimately I think you should have points that go from first to last.
Yeah.
Because that way a car that's battling for 15th or 16th place can actually win a visible point, because they have the invisible rules that they work out finishes and all that, but there's no points related to
Absolutely.
it. So it needs to be, I think there needs to be more transparency in terms of points across the board, especially when you have a much bigger grid. So new engines, wherever we're going to go, ultimately, unless you're going to go back to some kind of V8 or V10 engine, it could be slightly different in the way it's made. It could use more KERS performance, because they still had KERS, obviously, with the V8s. So it could be, a V8 engine, but with a massive amount of KERS. That would be fantastic as well. So a lot to change, but they do need to reduce the costs. The costs of Formula One are astronomical, and I know that Ross Brawn has mentioned before that there's elements to the cars, such as steering wheels and various other things, suspension parts, which are actually quite structured in terms of how they have to be made, and you agree what type of suspension you need. And you'll find a lot of the cars are using the same suspension. It's other elements that they can focus their finances on. Yeah. So, let's wait and see what happens. But Ross Brawn, the brain of Ross Brawn, cannot be underestimated.
Absolutely. And also, I know we're running out of time, but Ross Brawn, I think, will probably be looking at the weekend format as well of the Formula One calendar. I think this weekend also proved, do we really need the Friday? It is a unnecessary two sessions, really, and I'd rather see a jam-packed Saturday with a practice, a qualifying session, and I'm quite a big fan of bringing back Sunday morning practice.
Yes, I am as well. As a Formula One fan,
why not?
I used to love that. I used to go to Silverstone, be there at 5 o'clock in the morning, get my grassy knoll, and they would come out. V10s, I remember, used to come out early in the morning, and they were so loud. My goodness me, at that time in the morning. But it was brilliant.
Why not have a 1 hour? They arrive on a Saturday, 1 hour practice. They set up their cars for qualifying. They qualify. Then on Sunday morning, they do practice, and they can set up the cars for the race.
That's an idea. I mean, I think that.
So if you've had a crap qualifying session, you can actually play around with your car to make it more racy, to go to the front of the grid.
Yeah, I think that it needs to be thought about how best they can do it. But I'm certainly someone who would prefer to see, like yourself, to see that morning practice back, if only for the fans who are at the circuit. Gives them more for their race ticket. Race tickets are expensive. There's also the talk of the drivers doing, like they used to do, like a pro championship where they used to race other cars. I would like to see that. And what it is that the drivers would race in a stock car of some kind.
Yep.
The only problem is that under the current Concord agreement, the drivers will all have to sign new contracts, because the F1 teams are going to say, well, what if they crash? Then they won't be able to compete in the F1.
And what car? Because would you see a Vettel driving a Mercedes?
Well, there's that as well. There would have to be some car that everybody agrees to.
A Nissan Leaf.
Well, it could even be a different car entirely. A Nissan Leaf, exactly. It could be a different car entirely. It could be like, right, everyone's in a Porsche.
Yeah.
No one drives Porsche in Formula One.
That's true.
And, it'll be something like that. So I think that, there's definitely possibilities. It doesn't even have to be a super fast car comparatively. It could be a more skillful car. Yeah. We'll have them all in Renault Clios, and then
Formula E.
Formula E, and Formula Clio E.
No, we don't talk about jokey racing series on this channel.
Exactly. No, this is a serious conversation. But I'd like to see something like that, but we'll wait and see.
Anyway, it's Bahrain this weekend. It's a twilight race. We expect the battle between Ferrari, Mercedes, or should we just say Vettel and Hamilton to continue? For me, Palmer needs to have a decent weekend. Hopefully, we'll see Wehrlein back, although I have seen talk that he might return in Sochi. And Raikkonen needs to figure out his weaknesses, otherwise, people are going to be looking this early on at his seat for 2018.
Yeah, Raikkonen under pressure, there's no doubt. Really negative noises coming out of Ferrari. He needs to. I think they didn't like the way he was having a go at them, but he doesn't like the way he feels his car's not set up right for some reason. Ooh. Anyway, more of that. Look forward to the Bahrain Grand Prix. Thanks for your time today, Tim.
Been great.
And yeah, we look forward to next week's race as ever. I'll be keeping up with all the news on the website in terms of the practice sessions and read about it there, as long as all the times, the stats and information you've seen in this video. And look forward to the racing next weekend. Again, brand new circuit. Interesting to see how the various cars will perform. We expect a dry race, as it always is. Racing at night again. Always nice to see. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.